I'm sorry, but before we start using Python, we need to get familiar with the environment and the interface that's going to contain our Python code. So, very first thing is, how does our computer know that we're dealing with Python code and not any other programming language? So, to start with answering that, many programming languages consist of instructions for computers, and all of these languages can perform many different instructions, and they have different ways to express those instructions. That's really the difference between programming languages. And you can think of those languages as you can international languages, so you can say hello in English or in Spanish to convey the same message. And to get the translation, you could use a dictionary. In a computer, you can do the same, but you need to use an interpreter that acts as that dictionary, which maps between one language to another for each of the same words. So an interpreter is a computer program that directly executes instructions written in a programming language. And Python is the programming language that we're going to be using. The instructions are inside those scripts or interactive notebooks that the interpreter is going to execute. And in this video, I want to show you how to create scripts, create notebooks, what each of those things are, and how to use the interface to help us edit our code and make programs that eventually are going to power industry AI systems. So firstly, let's just take a look at what a Python script looks like. In this folder, we've got a Python script and an interactive notebook. You can tell that this file is a script because its extension is Py, which is short for Python. And we can tell that this file is an interactive notebook because its extension is IPyNB, which is short for Interactive Python Notebook. If you haven't installed Python or any editor on your computer, if you just open this script, it's going to open up a regular text file containing the contents of that Python program. And on the other hand, if you've installed a Python editor, you might be able to open the Python integrated editor. The default one is called idle. So you can see that different operations have different colors. So this print is one color and these comments are in another color. And this editor is helping us to understand and read the code a little more easily just by linting the code in this way, coloring it and formatting it as such. And that Python extension is what's telling your computer how to highlight this code to make it useful. Because it knows that it's a Python script and your computer's got Python installed on, your computer knows to open up these files in an editor which shows this highlighting. As opposed to script, you need a special editor to open up interactive notebooks, or we'll just call them notebooks. And if you want to open both, you can download editors that integrate different functionalities to open different types of files. So these kind of integrated editors are named Integrated Development Environments, or IDEs for short. And in this course, as is industry standard, we're going to be using VS Code as the primary development environment. So let's take a look at how to install it and to download a Python package manager, which is another piece of software that we're going to need. The Python package manager is a tool for downloading code which other people have written and using it in your programs. The one that we're going to use is called Miniconda. It's a lightweight package manager. That means you can get all of the code which your code depends on easily, and it's pretty standard to be using that. So you can download VS Code by just searching for it online. Be careful not to confuse it with Microsoft Visual Studio. We want Visual Studio Code, VS Code. And here in this link, this is where we can download VS Code from. You've got to choose the right operating system, of course, and then we'll have that on our machine. And now we want to download Miniconda, which is one of the other things that we're going to need. So let's just search that up, click through here, click on the operating system that we're using, not the one I'm using, just to be clear. Use the one that you're using. Make sure that you get the right architecture. Is it 32 or 64-bit, your computer? So let's take a look at the script that we saw earlier. To do so, you can click File, Open Folder, and then open up the folder containing those scripts. And now this folder is going to appear on the left-hand side of the window. So you can click this open, you can see the files that we've got in here. And if you click on the file, it will appear in the editor. The editor in VS Code also has different colors for each operation. So it makes it easier to read Python files and other files for that matter. But yours might not have this, and this is just a point I want to mention, which is that VS Code, one of the key parts about it is that there's loads of extensions you can add on to your version. These give it enhanced functionality. One of those would be code highlighting for Python. The extension which contains that is the Python extension. This extension is also the one that will display interactive Python notebooks as they should be displayed. So to run code in VS Code, you've got a few different options. Some are recommended, and some I'll be mad if I catch you using them. The first, which I do not recommend, is using the play button at the top right of the window. I don't recommend this for two reasons. One, it might not be clear which version of Python it's running, and that might be the different version to the one that you want to use. And two, it might be running Python from the wrong location and complain that it can't find the file because it's in a different folder, and that's where you are in VS Code. So another option is using magic cells. This is a more preferred way to run your code. To do this, you can just use the hashtag %% comment. This is like a magic comment. And what it does is everything comprised between two sets of these characters is going to run individually in an interactive window. So that means you can run bits of your code part by part. And that's really useful when you're developing. If you just want to run an isolated unit, check if it works as it should do, then that's a good, quick way to work with it. The interactive mode of Python as well, this window on the right-hand side here, what this is a version of Python where the variables are kind of stored in memory after you run each cell. So after each cell, you can print out what the values are, you can take a look at things, and the program hasn't ended necessarily. It's kind of paused between each cell. And the same is true for interactive notebooks. The advantage of using these magic cells as compared to using notebooks though, is that this is a Python file. And a Python file you can run wherever. You can run it on the cloud, you can run it here, but you don't have to depend on a person clicking the cells. That's the case you have to depend on. If you're running a Python notebook, someone needs to be there to click through those cells. And you can't count on someone always being there. If you want to deploy this code onto the cloud, then you're going to need it to be able to run on its own. And so that's why a Python file is, I much prefer it to developing in a notebook, because you can actually just send this off to be deployed. Finally, you can run the Python file through the terminal. Once you've got that open, you can run your Python script using a bash command. And the command you want to run here is Python followed by the name of your file. The only thing you got to be careful of is making sure that you're in the right location on your computer. So check your terminal, make sure that you're in the same location as the Python file you want to run. Otherwise, instead of just passing the name to this command, passing the absolute or relative file path. So now you know how to run Python scripts in VS Code. And what about notebooks? Well, it's not really that much more difficult, so let's go and take a look at that. Simply open the file corresponding to the notebook, and it should look like this. If it doesn't, and it looks like a mess, then it's probably just not been formatted, and that's probably because you haven't installed the Python extension. So again, just go to the VS Code Extensions tab and find the Python extension there. Once you've installed that, you might need to close the IPyNB file and reopen it, but then things should be fine. Another common issue you can have with opening these Python notebooks is that there'll be a pop-up and it says, this notebook is not trusted, do you want to trust it? And you should say, yep, I want to trust it. And that should run the cells, and finally you should end up with everything formatted as it should be. And if not, just give us a shout. So what is a notebook? Well, a notebook is a collection of text and code in different cells. This allows us to run code and add some notes to give an explanation of what parts the code might do. So you've got this markdown and you've also got code. When you open up a notebook, the associated kernel is automatically launched. A notebook kernel is the engine that's executing the Python code. It contains information about the interpreter you're using, the version of Python you're using, that is. It contains information about what variables are currently stored, how many runs have been executed of the different cells, and that kind of thing. So I mentioned cells. So each rectangle you see in this document is a cell. You can run the code in a cell using the play button on the left-hand side, or again, even better, learn a shortcut, and this is really one you should learn. Just hold shift and press enter when you're inside a cell, and that's going to run it. So I don't want to see anybody clicking that play button. The variables in a cell persist after you run the cell. So if we first run this cell and then run the next cell, you see that in this second cell, the value is still saved and we can use it. There are some alternatives to add new cells in your notebook. You can hover on the cell and click the 3 dots and then insert cell, or you can hover your mouse between 2 cells and click the buttons which appear there. So you'll notice there's a difference between when you're clicked in a cell and then if you press escape. The difference is that when you're clicked in a cell, you're in edit mode. And when you click escape, you're in command mode. In command mode, you can execute different commands. So these are the little shortcuts that are part of these notebook files. One of them is B, and that's short for below. If you press B, it's going to insert a cell below. If you press A, it's going to insert a cell above. And there's a few others. For example, if you press D twice, it's going to delete a cell. If you press Y, and if you press Y, it's going to convert it to a code cell. Or if you press M, it's going to convert it to a markdown cell. Again, markdown is just containing text. Markdown's really simple. It's got a few little pieces of syntax which you should definitely learn. Things like the lines which start with a hashtag are headings, and dashes represent bullet points. So just take a look at that and you'll get used to it over time anyway. But yeah, you'll be seeing a lot of markdown over the place here. So to finish off here, let's just talk You can use Miniconda and its command line interface Conda to create what are called virtual environments. A virtual environment is an isolated environment in which you can store all of the specific versions of particular code which you might have downloaded from other people who have written it. And that means that you can separate out different projects which might have conflicting different versions of code or different libraries which you don't want to kind of pack up when you finally ship this code. And so you can keep them separate, and by specifying this different virtual environment with the interpreter, you can make sure that your code isn't going to have access or not have access to some code which it should have or shouldn't have. So in a Python file, you can choose the interpreter at the bottom left of the window. And the same before, it'll prompt you the available interpreters. As a final note, and to make you a little bit more pro at using VS Code, you can also choose the interpreter using the command palette. So to open that, do Command-Shift-P or Control-Shift-P if you're on Windows or Linux. And a search bar will appear so you can search for, you can search for all the commands over VS Code actually. But one of them you can do is select interpreter, and here you'll be able to select which interpreter you want to use. So right here, what have we seen? We've seen how to use Python on your computer. We've seen that you can use .py files or .ipynb files, and we're going to be doing a lot of that. You should have set up your environment and be able to replicate everything which I've shown here. If you haven't, don't continue because you haven't got it set up correctly. And if you have any issues, just let us know. And make sure that you've got VS Code and Miniconda working as I've shown. I know you might have your own favorite editor, but I really recommend going with VS Code. This is industry standard and has a lot more tools and functionality that you'll probably see me using that are going to help you to be a better developer.